Have you ever noticed how people talk about heart attacks as if they're daytime events, as if they happen out there in traffic, in meetings, during stress, during effort, during motion? But your heart does not become irrelevant when the lights go out. In some ways, night is when the cardiovascular system reveals the most about how healthy or how strained it really is. And that's why some of the smallest habits in the last hour before bed matter so much more than people realize. I'm talking about the habits that take 30 seconds, one last scroll on your phone, one last drink, one last snack, one quiet decision to ignore the snoring, the gasping, the midnight heaviness in your chest, the restless sleep you've normalized because it happens so often you stopped seeing it as information. Now, I want to be very clear with you from the start. This is not going to be one of those videos where someone scares you with dramatic language and then gives you a list of random bedtime rules with no explanation. I find that kind of content unhelpful because fear without understanding doesn't actually change behavior. What changes behavior is mechanism. What changes behavior is when you suddenly realize, oh, that little thing I keep doing at night is not little at all. It's interacting with blood pressure, oxygen levels, blood sugar, inflammation, rhythm, and recovery in ways I never understood. That's what I want to walk you through today. I want to show you what your heart is actually trying to do at night when the system is working properly. I want to show you the specific nighttime mistakes that interfere with that process. And I want to show you why those mistakes are dangerous, not because they're dramatic in the moment, but because they are repeated, quietly, daily, year after year. That is how risk is often built. Not in one spectacular event, but in one ordinary habit repeated hundreds of times. And there's one mistake in particular, one almost laughably small nighttime decision that people make without thinking about it, that often opens the door to several of the others. Once you see that chain clearly, the title of this video is not going to feel exaggerated. It's going to feel obvious. So, let's build it from the ground up. The first thing you need to understand is that nighttime is supposed to be a cardiovascular recovery window. Your body is not simply off when you sleep. It is shifting into a different operating mode. Heart rate generally comes down. Stress hormone activity should ease. Blood vessels relax. Blood pressure is supposed to fall during sleep. In healthy physiology, nighttime blood pressure usually dips by around 10 to 20% compared to daytime levels. That drop is not trivial. It is part of the repair cycle. Think about what that means. For your heart and arteries, sleep is not dead time. It is pressure relief. It is a scheduled period when the system gets to work under lighter load. But here's the problem. A lot of modern night habits blunt or completely disrupt that dip. And when blood pressure stays elevated at night, or when it doesn't fall the way it's supposed to, that pattern has been linked with higher cardiovascular risk. In other words, your heart may look relatively normal during the day, but nighttime can expose strain that daytime numbers don't fully capture. This is one reason sleep matters so much for heart health. Not just whether you technically closed your eyes for a few hours, but whether your body actually entered the kind of sleep in which it could do the repair work it was designed to do. And this is also why some people wake up tired even after being in bed long enough, because time in bed and cardiovascular recovery are not the same thing. You can be unconscious and still physiologically stressed. You can be asleep and still be running a terrible nighttime program. So now the question becomes, what ruins that program? Let me start with one of the most underestimated ones of all: irregular timing. Most people think sleep is about duration, and yes, duration matters. Adults generally do best in the 7 to 9 hour range. But duration is not the whole story. The timing of sleep matters. The regularity of sleep matters. The continuity of sleep matters. The body likes rhythm. Your heart likes rhythm. Your blood pressure likes rhythm, your hormones like rhythm, your metabolism likes rhythm. We are much more clock-driven than people realize. There was a large study that followed adults without cardiovascular disease at baseline and looked at how regular or irregular their sleep patterns were. Not just how many hours they slept, but how much their sleep duration and bedtime varied from night to night. And what researchers found was striking. The people with the most irregular sleep patterns had more than double the risk of developing cardiovascular disease compared with those whose sleep was most regular. Double. Now, I want you to think about how ordinary that risk factor sounds. We're not talking here about some rare disorder that affects 0.001% of the population. We're talking about going to bed at wildly different times, sleeping 6 hours one night, nine the next, midnight on Monday, 2 a.m. on Thursday, trying to catch up on the weekend, then shocking your body again on Sunday night. Millions of people live like this. They think of it as normal adult life. But to your circadian system, it is a constant message that day and night are unstable. And when that instability happens, cardiovascular regulation starts becoming unstable too. Your blood pressure doesn't just respond to salt and stress, it responds to time. Your heart rate doesn't just respond to exercise and anxiety, it responds to time. Insulin sensitivity changes with time. Hormone release changes with time. Temperature changes with time. The body is incredibly scheduled. So when you keep changing the schedule, you are forcing the system to constantly reorient itself. This is why people use the phrase social jet lag. You don't need to board a plane to create circadian chaos. You can do it from your couch just by sleeping one schedule during the work week and another on the weekend. To your biology, that is not harmless flexibility. That is repeated time zone shifting, and the downstream effects are not abstract. Irregular sleep timing has been associated with higher blood pressure, greater inflammation, worse metabolic regulation, and higher cardiovascular risk. Even late sleep timing by itself seems to matter. Bedtimes drifting past midnight have been associated in some research with higher risk of overweight, elevated blood pressure, and poorer metabolic health. Now, am I saying that every person who goes to bed late is headed for a heart attack? No. That would be a ridiculous oversimplification. Risk is never that simple. But I am saying that when late timing becomes inconsistent timing, and inconsistent timing becomes chronic circadian disruption, the cardiovascular system pays attention. And this leads directly to one of the most common 30-second nighttime mistakes people make. You're in bed, you're tired enough, it is time to sleep. But then your hand reaches for the phone, just for a second, just to check one thing, one message, one notification, one video, one headline, one quick look. And almost nobody is honest about what happens next. Because it's not 30 seconds. It's rarely 30 seconds. It becomes 12 minutes, 25 minutes, 47 minutes. But even more than the time lost, it changes the state of your nervous system. You are reintroducing light, stimulation, novelty, emotional activation, maybe stress, maybe outrage, maybe comparison, maybe work, maybe breaking news, maybe something funny that wakes your brain back up. You are telling the brain we are not closing the day yet. Stay alert. People sometimes think the danger of bedtime phone use is just that it delays sleep a little. But the real issue is that it destabilizes timing and sleep continuity. It makes bedtime later than planned, more variable from night to night, and often lighter and more fragmented. It's not just a light problem, it's a rhythm problem. That tiny decision, that one last scroll, is often the gateway habit. It opens the door to the late bedtime, the shortened sleep, the next day caffeine compensation, the evening fatigue, the second wind, and the same delayed bedtime the next night. That's why I called it a 30-second mistake, not because the damage is done in half a minute, but because the decision is. Now let me move to another one that people routinely treat as harmless, eating too close to bedtime. This is incredibly common. Dinner runs late, or dinner was small, so there's dessert later. Or the kids are finally asleep and this is the first quiet moment of the day, so now the snack comes out. Chips, ice cream, cereal, leftovers, toast, whatever is easy. It feels innocent because it feels normal, but nighttime is not metabolically identical to daytime. Your body's ability to handle food changes across the day. Digestive timing changes, hormonal timing changes, glucose handling changes. And when you eat close to bedtime, especially large meals or meals high in sugar and fat, you are asking the body to do digestive and metabolic work during a window that is supposed to be moving toward rest and repair. There are a few ways this becomes a cardiovascular issue. First, Large late meals can worsen sleep quality. If you lie down soon after eating, the chance of reflux and sleep disruption goes up. That means more awakenings, lighter sleep, less recovery, and less of that nighttime blood pressure dipping your body is supposed to get. Second, late night eating can interfere with blood sugar regulation. If your glucose stays elevated later into the night, or if you make nighttime eating a pattern, that matters for long term metabolic health, and metabolic health is inseparable from heart health. Third, habitual night eating has been linked in research with progression of arterial stiffness, which is important because stiffer arteries mean the cardiovascular system is working with less flexibility and more pressure over time. Now, this kind of research always needs careful interpretation. It doesn't prove that one late snack causes disease. Human behavior is more complex than that. But the signal is worth paying attention to. The body seems to care not just what you eat, but when. And the food quality matters a lot here. A late night bowl of sugary cereal, a pastry, a processed snack, or a high fat fast food meal doesn't just sit there passively. It can create a messy combination of elevated glucose, digestive strain, poor sleep, and next morning sluggishness. Then people wake up tired, under-recovered, and think they need more stimulation to function. So the next day begins in compensation mode. This is how a night habit becomes a morning problem, and a morning problem becomes a chronic pattern. The guideline that makes the most biological sense is surprisingly simple. Give yourself a few hours between your last substantial meal and bedtime. Not because food is bad at night in some mystical way, but because digestion is work, and the body sleeps better when it's not doing unnecessary metabolic heavy lifting at the exact moment it's trying to shift into recovery. Now, if late night eating is the underestimated mistake, alcohol is the socially protected one. A lot of people still think of alcohol as a sleep aid. It makes them drowsy, so they assume it helps them sleep. But drowsiness and restorative sleep are not the same thing. Alcohol can knock you out and still give you bad sleep. This is one of those areas where the effect sounds almost unfair. You feel sleepy faster, but the sleep quality gets worse. Alcohol fragments sleep. It reduces the stability of sleep stages. It interferes with REM sleep, which matters for brain restoration, memory processing, and emotional regulation. It can also make snoring and sleep apnea worse by relaxing airway muscles. So the person says, "But I slept all night." Did you though? Or were you sedated, intermittently activated, breathing less well, cycling poorly, and waking up less restored than you realize? That difference matters. A lot. Because if your sleep quality is being quietly degraded night after night, your cardiovascular system never gets the full recovery window it's expecting. And there's another layer. Alcohol doesn't just affect sleep architecture, it can raise blood pressure, and in some people, it can contribute to irregular heart rhythms. That's one reason heavy episodic drinking has long had a reputation for triggering rhythm problems in otherwise healthy people. The heart is electrically sensitive. And alcohol, especially near bedtime, is not neutral in that environment. This is why the nightcap idea is so misleading. It feels soft, relaxing, adult, civilized, but physiologically, it can be the opposite of what your heart needs before sleep. If someone chooses to drink, the least damaging timing is earlier, not right before bed. Giving the body more time to metabolize alcohol before sleep begins makes more sense than taking it into the night with you. A useful rule of thumb, often suggested by sleep specialists, is to avoid alcohol within at least about 3 hours of bedtime. That doesn't make alcohol heart protective. It just reduces some of the sleep disruption that a true bedtime drink can create. Now, let me talk about the nighttime risk factor that is probably the most serious one people dismiss for years: sleep apnea. This matters because sleep apnea is not just snoring. People hear snoring and think annoying, embarrassing, inconvenient, loud. They don't think cardiovascular stress disorder. But that is much closer to the truth. In obstructive sleep apnea, the airway repeatedly narrows or collapses during sleep. Breathing is reduced or briefly stops. Oxygen levels can drop. The brain senses that something is wrong. The body triggers a stress response to reopen the airway. And that cycle can happen again and again and again throughout the night. Now imagine what that means for the heart. You are asleep, but the body is being repeatedly pushed into alarm mode. Oxygen dips, stress signals rise, blood pressure surges, heart rate fluctuations increase, sleep fragments, recovery is interrupted. And because this can happen dozens or even hundreds of times a night in severe cases, the cardiovascular system is being stressed during the very hours that should be the most restorative. Untreated sleep apnea has been linked with high blood pressure, heart attack, stroke, coronary artery disease, and heart failure risk. That is not small. That is not cosmetic. That is not just snoring. And the frustrating part is that many people do not know they have it, or they know something is wrong, but they've normalized it. They say things like, "Yeah, I snore, but everybody snores," or "I wake up tired, but I'm just getting older," or "I fall asleep during the day because I'm busy," or "My partner says I gasp sometimes, but I don't notice it." Those are not details to shrug off. Loud snoring, gasping, choking awake, morning headaches, excessive daytime sleepiness, trouble concentrating, irritability, waking unrefreshed no matter how long you were in bed. These are not random annoyances. They can be clues. And I think this is one of the most dangerous night mistakes of all, mistaking symptoms for personality. I'm just not a morning person. I've always been tired. I just need coffee. I sleep badly, that's just me. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe what feels like your normal is actually years of physiologic disruption during sleep. Now, I'm not here to diagnose anyone through a screen. That would be inappropriate and not helpful, but I am saying this. If the signs are there, ignoring them is not a neutral choice, because the heart experiences the consequences whether you label them or not. Let me now bring all of this back to something broader, not getting enough sleep in the first place. This part is so common that people barely register it as a health issue anymore. Sleep becomes the first thing people borrow from and the last thing they repay. Work runs late, screens run later, then alarms still come early. People get 6 hours, sometimes 5, sometimes 4.5, then treat that as a scheduling problem instead of a biological stressor. But short sleep is not just about feeling tired. When you consistently sleep pH than your body needs, blood pressure tends to stay higher for longer. Appetite regulation becomes worse. Glucose control worsens. Inflammatory signaling rises. Stress hormones become harder to regulate. Energy drops, so food choices often get worse and physical activity often goes down. It becomes a full body problem, and the heart is in the middle of that problem. This is one reason public health guidance is so consistent on the 7 to 9 hour range for most adults. Not because every person is identical, but because once sleep becomes chronically insufficient, the cardiovascular consequences stop being theoretical. And I want to say something here that people often need to hear directly. You cannot fully out-hack chronic sleep deprivation. You cannot simply compensate for terrible sleep with supplements, with coffee timing, with hydration tricks, with a better pillow, with a smartwatch score, with one perfect Sunday night. Those things may help at the margins, but they do not replace sleep, and this is where the phone returns to the story again.